When people think of the Wild Bunch, names like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid usually come to mind. But among their ranks was a man far more feared, a gunslinger with a ruthless reputation, Kid Curry. Unlike Cassidy, who preferred outwitting the law over spilling blood, Kid Curry left a trail of bodies in his wake. Lawmen dreaded him, bounty hunters hesitated to chase him, and his fellow outlaws knew that when Curry drew his gun, someone was going to die. But was he truly the most dangerous member of the Wild Bunch? Or has time exaggerated his legend? In this deep dive into Old West history, we uncover the truth behind Kid Curry's violent past and his role in one of the most infamous outlaw gangs of all time.
Now let's ride into the lawless frontier and uncover the truth about Kid Curry. Butch Cassidy, whose real name was Robert Leroy Parker, and his close associate, the Sundance Kid, born Harry Alonzo Longabaugh, gained notoriety for robbing trains and committing other crimes. However, they were not known for taking lives. The same cannot be said for Kid Curry, a fellow member of the Wild Bunch. Born Harvey A. Logan in Iowa in 1867, he developed a reputation for being far more dangerous than his infamous counterparts. In my 2012 book, He Rode with Butch and Sundance, the story of Harvey Kid Curry. Logan, I pointed out that Curry has often been credited with 8 or 9 killings, though some sources inflate that number to as many as 40. However, these claims are difficult to verify. The only death that can be definitively linked to him occurred during a saloon altercation with miner Pike Landusky in Montana, an incident that may have been an act of self-preservation rather than outright aggression. Despite the lack of clear evidence, many modern accounts continue to associate Curry with nearly every suspected killing attributed to the Wild Bunch. Yet a closer examination of historical records shows that many of these claims do not hold up when considering factors such as time, location, and other circumstances. While this does not rule out the possibility that he was involved in other deadly encounters, it does suggest that his reputation may have been exaggerated. Alleged victims. One of the earliest documented claims about Kid Curry's violent history came from Robert A. Pinkerton, a key figure in the Pinkerton National Detective Agency. Operating out of the agency's New York office, Pinkerton was among Curry's most determined adversaries. However, when reporting on the outlaw's arrest near Knoxville, Tennessee, on December 15, 1901, he did not rely on exaggerated legends. Instead, he sent a direct and urgent message to the local police chief. Pinkerton congratulated law enforcement on their success, emphasizing that Logan was among the most dangerous criminals in the West. He described him as a leading figure in train and bank robberies, without rival in his line of crime. According to Pinkerton, Curry was also responsible for 3 killings and had a well-earned reputation as an expert at escaping custody. He strongly advised keeping a constant guard on him to prevent any potential breakout. A second source regarding Curry's actions comes from the outlaw himself. In the days leading up to his arrest, he spent considerable time in Knoxville's bars, drinking and playing pool. A local newspaper reported that he often displayed a roll of $20 bills and carried a pair of revolvers. Under the influence, he boasted about his past, claiming that he had taken the lives of 3 men. Given Curry's reputation, one might expect that, if exaggerating, he would have claimed a much higher number. Instead, his statement aligned with the figure Pinkerton had cited. This suggests that his admission, while perhaps not entirely definitive, was likely based on some degree of truth. In 1954, authors James D. Horan and Paul Sand compiled a timeline of incidents they attributed to Curry in their pictorial History of the Wild West. Their list contained 9 deaths but was riddled with errors, including misspelled names and incorrect dates. Notably, they did not cite any law enforcement records or verified sources, raising questions about the reliability of their account. Another account of Kid Curry's alleged killings comes from Pinkerton agent Lowell Spence, who compiled a list of 7 victims. Unlike other records, his list does not include George Scarborough or Oliver Thornton. Spence submitted his findings to the agency along with a report titled Logan's Log, a document in which he detailed his efforts to track Curry's activities from June 2nd, 1899 to December 15th, 1901. Interestingly, Logan's Log does not mention 5 deaths attributed to a group of outlaws that caused havoc across Arizona Territory and Utah in the spring of 1900. Instead, it records only 3 names: Oliver Thornton, Josiah Hazen, and Jim Winters. Spence appeared uncertain about Thornton's actual killer. While he acknowledged that George and Ed Kilpatrick were indicted for the crime and that Logan was involved, he did not explicitly assign blame to Curry himself. This omission raises several questions. Did Spence leave out those 5 deaths because he found no evidence linking Curry to them? Additionally, when he compiled his broader list of 7 victims, was he attributing all of them specifically to Curry? Or did he mean to include killings carried out by the Wild Bunch as a whole? One notable discrepancy is the case of Pike Landowski. While his name appears on Spence's 7-victim list, it is absent from Logan's log. This could suggest that Spence viewed Landowski's death as an established fact, requiring no further documentation. Given that witness testimony from the coroner's inquest into the incident was clear, Spence may not have felt the need to include it. To summarize, Spence's records suggest that at least 3 individuals, Landowski, Hazen, and Winters, were likely killed by Curry. However, it is important to note that none of the documents he submitted mention another killing frequently attributed to Curry: the 1897 death of Deputy Sheriff William Billy Dean in Johnson County, Wyoming. Some historians suggest that by early 1899, Kid Curry had traveled with Butch Cassidy and gang member William Ellsworth, LZ Lay, to southwestern New Mexico territory. According to this claim, Curry adopted the alias Tom Capehart and took a job at the W.S. Ranch near Alma. However, this story appears to be more myth than fact, possibly originating from Charles A. Siringo, a cowboy, detective, and Texas Ranger. In his 1919 autobiography, A Lone Star Cowboy, Siringo wrote that Kid Curry knew every foot of this whole country, as he had been a cowboy along the line of New Mexico and Arizona under the name of Tom Capehart. He further alleged that Capehart had previously killed George Scarborough. Later authors, including James D. Horn, Charles Kelly, and Brown Waller, repeated Siringo's claim, sometimes adding their own interpretations. As a result, Curry, under the assumed identity of Capehart, was linked to a gang of 5 outlaws suspected of killing Gus Gibbons, Frank LeSueur, and Scarborough in Arizona Territory, as well as Jesse Tyler and Sam Jenkins in Utah. However, this theory has a major flaw. The real Tom Capehart, a Texas cowboy, was documented as working at the W.S. Ranch during the time Curry was supposedly there. If Curry had used Capehart's name while working alongside him, it would have been an obvious and illogical deception. Furthermore, no verifiable records place Curry in the Southwest during the period when these 5 murders occurred. While he was certainly involved in violent incidents elsewhere, the evidence does not support his connection to these particular killings. If we consider Landowski as a confirmed case, that still leaves 4 names frequently linked to Curry: Deputy William Billy Dean, Josiah Hazen, Oliver Thornton, and Jim Winters. However, even these attributions remain uncertain, illustrating the difficulty in separating fact from legend when it comes to the Wild Bunch. Examining the evidence. Deputy Sheriff Billy Dean lost his life on April 13, 1897, more than 2 years after the death of Pike Landowski. Johnson County Sheriff Al Sproul had specifically hired Dean to track down cattle thieves. While Dean was known for his level-headed determination, his choice to pursue fugitives alone was a risky decision. Setting out south from Buffalo that morning, Dean confronted 2 suspected rustlers at the Griggs family's post office. These individuals were believed to be part of an outlaw gang and may have included Flat-Nosed George Curry and 2 men using the aliases of Curry and the Sundance Kid. Reports suggest that Dean aggressively pushed for a confrontation, but the outlaws chose to ride away instead. Undeterred, Dean gave chase. A few hours later, near the Kaltenbach sheep ranch, he spotted 4 riders he believed were the same rustlers. He closed the distance to about 400 or 500 yards, dismounted and fired at them. The riders immediately responded by dismounting and returning fire. 3 bullets struck Dean, and he succumbed to his injuries within minutes. Eyewitness accounts indicated that up to 7 men had fired at the deputy, with at least 2 positioned in an ambush. Given the uncertainty surrounding the identities of the shooters, Dean's death cannot be definitively attributed to Curry. While members of the hole-in-the-wall gang were the primary suspects, no one was officially identified or arrested. A coroner's jury later reviewed the case, and the Buffalo Bulletin reported on April 22nd that the official verdict was that Dean had died from gunshot wounds inflicted by unknown individuals. With multiple shooters engaging from a considerable distance, determining Curry's involvement, if any, remains speculative at best. A little more than 2 years later, on June 5, 1899, Converse County, Wyoming, Sheriff Josiah Hazen was fatally wounded while tracking 3 men suspected of robbing a Union Pacific train near Wilcox just days earlier. The posse had followed the fugitives, George Curry, Kid Curry, and the Sundance Kid, to Castle Creek, located between Casper and the well-known outlaw hideout, Hole in the Wall. Sheriff Hazen and Dr. John F. Leeper of Casper, though some accounts claim the second man was Union Pacific Special Agent Frank Wheeler, dismounted and moved on foot up a draw, looking for tracks left by the outlaws' horses. Hazen located the trail and called out to Dr. Leeper. As the Leeper stepped closer, shots suddenly rang out from a hidden position. Newspapers described the attack as either a rapid succession of shots or a coordinated volley, with one posse member recalling the sounds of 3 separate firearms. The Wyoming Derrick reported on June 8th that Hazen was struck in the abdomen by a bullet that entered on his right side and passed through. As he was hit, he reportedly raised his hands in reaction. The outlaws continued firing, keeping the posse pinned down long enough to escape north along the creek. Hazen was rushed first to Casper and then to his home in Douglas, where he passed away early the next morning. The Cheyenne Daily Sun leader reported on June 10th that some posse members attempted to return fire, but the bandits remained out of sight. Their use of smokeless powder also made it impossible to pinpoint their locations. While no one in the posse could confirm who fired the fatal shot, the outlaws themselves may have known. Unlike the earlier Dean incident, this confrontation took place at a much closer range. Additionally, only 3 outlaws were positioned against 2 pursuers, making it more likely that the shooter could be identified within their own ranks. Some reports mention that the first gunshot was distinct from the following bursts, which may indicate that one of the bandits was aware of delivering the critical hit. Given these details, it is possible that Hazen was among those whom Curry later referred to as having fallen by his hand. However, with no definitive evidence or witness testimony, the exact identity of the shooter remains uncertain. Determining who was responsible for Oliver Thornton's death is nearly impossible after so many years. However, historical records place members of the Wild Bunch, Kid Curry, William Carver, and Ben Kilpatrick, at the Kilpatrick family farm in Planch Spring, located between Eden and Paint Rock in Concho County, Texas, in late March 1901. The outlaws had retreated there to lay low after a well-known gathering in Fort Worth the previous fall, where they had posed for the infamous Fort Worth 5 photograph alongside Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. The group had arranged to meet in Fort Worth after splitting up to commit 2 high-profile robberies, one targeting a Union Pacific train in Tipton, Wyoming, and the other hitting the First National Bank in Winnemucca, Nevada. Meanwhile, on March 23, 1901, Butch Cassidy, the Sundance Kid, and Ethel Place departed from New York City and arrived in Buenos Aires, Argentina, by steamship. Around the same time, Curry, Carver, and Kilpatrick, who had been posing as horse dealers while traveling through West Texas in a rubber-tired buggy, made their way to the Kilpatrick family farm. By March 27, the day Thornton was shot, several members of the Kilpatrick family were also present, including Ben's younger brothers, George, Ed, and Felix, as well as his sisters, Ola and Alice. The first newspaper account of the incident appeared in the Devil's River News on April 6, 1901. According to the report, the details surrounding the event were inconsistent and conflicting. Thornton, who worked for Ed Dozier on a nearby farm, had been struggling with hogs from the Kilpatrick property wandering onto Dozier's land. Frustrated, he went to the Kilpatrick home to demand that the animals be kept away. At the time, Ed and George Kilpatrick, along with a man identified as Walker, were playing croquet. Thornton, armed with a Winchester rifle, reportedly confronted the group aggressively. Ed Kilpatrick responded by explaining that the hogs belonged to his brother, Boone Kilpatrick, and insisted that they were not looking for trouble. The situation quickly escalated, and according to the report, Walker fired the shot that struck Thornton. However, with conflicting accounts and no definitive evidence, the full circumstances of the confrontation remain unclear. Charles Walker was actually an alias used by Will Carver, while Kid Curry, who was also present, had taken the name Bob McDonald. The Pinkerton detectives were familiar with these false identities, but local law enforcement was not. The Kilpatrick family took advantage of this knowledge gap to initially mislead investigators looking into Thornton's death. Later, George Kilpatrick identified Walker as Carver and claimed that McDonald, Curry's alias, was responsible for the shooting. However, the physical description of Walker, published in the newspaper, conflicted with this claim. The article described Walker as a small man weighing between 135 and 140 pounds, with a dark complexion, a heavy brown mustache, and a bald head. He was estimated to be between 35 and 40 years old. This description matched Curry more closely than Carver. Several months after the incident, Boone Kilpatrick, who was not present at the scene, told detectives in St. Louis that Carver was the one who had fired the fatal shot. Boone argued that the shooting was justified, claiming that Thornton had been attempting to load a shell into his shotgun when Carver acted. Historian John Eaton examined the case and found the circumstances puzzling. He noted that both Will Carver and Harvey Logan, Curry's real name, were known for using violence in robberies or to protect themselves, but it seemed unlikely they would take such a risk over a dispute about livestock. Any act of aggression would immediately attract law enforcement, which is exactly what happened after Thornton's death. This reasoning also applied to Ben Kilpatrick, who would have known the dangers of unnecessary confrontation. A report from the Billings Gazette on November 19, 1901, suggested another possibility. While in custody, Ben Kilpatrick reportedly claimed he had shot Thornton to protect his brother, Ed or George, who was allegedly being threatened with a firearm. Meanwhile, Texas rancher John Loomis had a different theory. He described the Kilpatrick brothers as natural-born criminals and suggested that one of the younger brothers, either Ed or George, had been responsible for the shooting. According to this perspective, the killing may have been an attempt to impress Carver, a more experienced outlaw. In March 1902, Ed and George Kilpatrick were arrested and stood trial for Thornton's death, but both were acquitted. When considering all available evidence, it appears that no one outside the Kilpatrick family and Carver knew that Curry was even in the area. Additionally, there was no clear proof linking him to the shooting. As a result, it remains uncertain whether he played any role in Thornton's death at all. One possible victim linked to Kid Curry was Montana rancher Jim Winters. After the Great Northern train robbery near Wagner, Montana, on July 3, 1901, Curry, Ben Kilpatrick, and O.C. Def Charlie Hanks hid in the rugged Missouri breaks. They remained in seclusion until law enforcement, exhausted from the chase, eventually abandoned the search. On the morning of July 25th, just over 3 weeks after the robbery, Winters stepped onto the back porch of his ranch house around 6 a.m. He was brushing his teeth when 2 bullets struck him in the abdomen. One became lodged in his stomach, while the other damaged his spinal column. Several people were at the ranch that morning, including 6 young men from the east who had come to help with the hay harvest. Some accounts suggest that Abe Gill, Winters' stepbrother and business partner, may have also been present, though sources differ on this detail. An inquest later listed the 6 Easterners as witnesses. One of them recalled seeing a figure, whom he did not recognize, moving quickly up a nearby coulee about 150 yards away. The shooter, or possibly multiple shooters, fired warning shots that kept the ranch hands pinned down until around 8:30 a.m. At that point, 2 of the men managed to ride north to Harlem to fetch a doctor. Investigators discovered several spent .30 to .40 Winchester shell casings near an old hog pen west of the house. This indicated the shooter had taken cover in that spot. Footprints leading away from the area suggested that 2 or 3 individuals had camped nearby, as evidenced by a creekside willow thicket where authorities found cigarette butts from hand-rolled tobacco. Additionally, tracks from at least 2 or 3 horses were spotted heading away from the scene. Authorities speculated that Winters' attackers had waited for hours, anticipating his appearance. It appeared that one individual left first, while the others provided covering fire. A 3-man posse attempted to track the suspects, but the trail soon disappeared, leaving the crime unresolved. The day after the incident, on July 26th, the Fort Benton River Press pointed to the Curry gang as the likely culprits. The newspaper noted that members of the gang and their associates had held a grudge against Winters ever since he had been involved in the death of John Curry about 5 years earlier. According to the report, that earlier event had been deemed justifiable, as John Curry had fired first with a revolver. The conflict between Winters and John Curry stemmed from a dispute over the Tressler Ranch, which Winters had legally purchased. However, John Curry had challenged the ownership, demanding that Winters leave the area. Winters had reportedly confided in Charles Siringo, a Pinkerton detective, that he feared an ambush by Kid Curry, John's brother. Despite this concern, 5 years had passed without any sign that Kid Curry intended to retaliate. Additionally, Winters had no shortage of other adversaries. Some residents of the Little Rockies in north-central Montana had grown frustrated with Winters and his stepbrother, Abe Gill, for allowing makeshift posses to camp on their property. While these groups claimed to be searching for the Great Northern train robbers, they had also caused damage, cutting fences, trampling crops, and frequently traveling into Landusky, where they drank heavily and disrupted the town. One particularly angry neighbor was said to have warned Winters that if he didn't compensate him for the damage, he would meet the same fate as Johnny Curry. Following an inquest, the official ruling was that Winters had been killed by an unknown individual or group. On September 3rd, after further inquiry, a grand jury in Fort Benton concluded that he had likely been targeted by someone already wanted by law enforcement, possibly a fugitive involved in the Great Northern robbery. However, the jury lacked sufficient proof to formally charge Kid Curry with the act. Winters may have been the last name on a list of 3 men reportedly targeted by Kid Curry, with the other 2 being Pike Landusky and Josiah Hazen. Yet without verification from Robert Pinkerton or Curry himself, this remains speculation. On June 7, 1904, Curry, along with 2 associates, carried out a robbery on a Denver and Rio Grande train near Parachute de Colorado. 2 days later, he found himself surrounded by lawmen and, after sustaining injuries, reportedly took his own life. Some questioned whether the deceased man was truly Curry, but officials in Knoxville, who had encountered him during his 1901-02 imprisonment, identified him from photographs as Harvey Logan, also known as Kid Curry. Final confirmation came from a distinctive 3-inch scar on his head, a lasting mark from an earlier altercation with a Knoxville police officer. Kid Curry's legacy remains one of the most debated among Old West outlaws. Was he the deadliest member of the Wild Bunch, or simply the most feared?
Please like and share if you find the video content interesting and useful. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment below so as not to miss the upcoming interesting videos. Thanks for watching.